I wanted to make a video on Boeing. The stock ticker is BA. This is a stock I've seen people on YouTube and Reddit talk about a couple times, and a couple other commercial airline stocks too, which was a little surprising to me because I thought after Warren Buffett sold all of his shares that the vast majority of people would not really care for the airline stocks. But maybe I was wrong, I don't know. Markets kind of tend to go off diversification of opinions anyways, so really shouldn't be that much of a surprise. But let's just go jump into the bull case real quick for Boeing. So when I see a lot of people talk about Boeing stock and the reasons for why you should invest in it, generally what they'll argue is that it's a duopoly, that you can't really replicate what it does, so it's hard to become a competitor to something like Boeing. Right, you can become a competitor to McDonald's fairly easy. You don't need a lot of cash. Something like Boeing or any airlines like that are really hard to replicate. Same with the railroads. They have a monopoly. Boeing has a large backlog that covers several years of production for the most popular aircraft. Boeing is well positioned to benefit from emerging market growth. So when we finally see India and China become more like the US, if you consider that a good thing, some people do, some people don't, then Boeing could potentially benefit more. I was looking at a chart for Boeing and I was kind of surprised. In the past 30 years, Boeing has managed to return a 6% rate, which was kind of surprising to me. I always assumed that airlines, all the airlines were averaging around 3%. But Boeing had 6% return, and that doesn't include the dividend. So if you include the dividend, it probably is more like 8%, probably close to the markets. And then the last thing that I usually hear people argue for the bull case for Boeing is that the government has some interest in the airline stocks. Boeing, 30% of their revenue comes from the government. And their bonds that they just delivered out, the government bought a pretty good portion of those bonds. So you could argue that the government has a pretty good interest in Boeing. It's probably not going to change anytime soon because they buy a lot of aircraft for the military through Boeing, and I don't see that changing. So that source of revenue should be there for the next 6 months to probably 10 years in the future. You could assume that. So what people think is that it'll be kind of like a Tesla stock, how the markets will keep it alive, but it's not profitable type scenario. But in this case, it'll be the government. It won't just be a bunch of investors and rich elite. It'll just be the government mainly. And some investors, but the government overall will help prop them up. Let's just go take a look at the bear case now. It could take years for airlines to recover from the economic carnage caused by COVID-19, and the virus could lead to changed consumer behavior that'd be unfavorable for the airline industry. For example, video conferences replace business travel. I was also looking at their 10Ks and 10Qs, and I was really not impressed with their numbers. When I was looking at their 10K, they had a 5.9% profit margin, a net loss of $636 million, free cash flow loss of $4.407 billion, and total equity loss of $8.3 billion. And when I was looking at their balance sheet, they really didn't have a lot of cash and cash equivalents for me to like them, to feel safe to invest in that kind of a company. You look at its total current liabilities and then you look at its total current assets, it does have more total current assets, but 76% of their total current assets is just inventories, which they might have trouble getting rid of some of that, especially in today's market. And when you scroll over to Q1 2020, they still have negative cash flow because they had negative cash flow in the 10K. So the next couple months down the road, they have negative cash flows again. And then you go over to Q1 2020, look at the balance sheet, total current assets. It went up a little bit. Their cash went up, and that's because of the bonds. But you look at the inventories, and their inventories went up. So they might have problems selling those inventories. So they might have to keep relying on the government, which could be an iffy scenario. The government could always just let them go bankrupt and then take them over that way, which would really screw over the shareholders. But at the same time, it's not the government's job to save investors. And a lot of people believe that. This is kind of like corporate socialism to a certain extent. The government just keeps feeding them at this point. It'd be different if the market was just feeding them. And then with the whole Tesla argument, you could do a counter argument, right? You could say that it's not the same as Tesla, and reason being is that their profit margins are not nearly as good as Tesla's profit margins are. Tesla profit margins are 20% in that range. Last time I looked, which was a while ago, but I imagine it got better. Not only that, but the followers for Tesla are loyal to the death, whereas Boeing, they don't really have much followers like that. Now, for me, I've always been a little skeptical of the auto industry and automobiles and airline companies. I've never invested in any of those. And I'm open-minded, so I'm willing to change that, but I've never done it just based on the fact that, GM's gone bankrupt, and every time a recession hits, automobiles always tend to get hit, and same with airline companies. They always tend to get hit pretty bad, commercial airlines. With this kind of a situation, I personally think it'd be better just to wait, and then the moment they produce a little bit of profit or at least some free cash flow, or just cash flow, it doesn't have to be free cash flow, just cash flow from operations, positive cash flow from operations. When you see that, maybe invest in it then. I mean, it will move up a little bit according to that, so you won't get the value buy to it, but that'd probably be the safer route to go. I think for me, though, I'm going to remain agnostic on this stock, but that's up to you. It can go either way. You can be a bear or a bull on this stock, but I'm going to just be agnostic.